To carry on with the theme of Smokey and some of the things he did, when I was taken off to the military, Camary was left at home, and I had bought 50 head of Louisiana swamp cattle to feed out. They were all steers. Uh, when I bought them, they weighed about 450 pounds, and I was growing them up to 700 or so pounds to sell them to go into feedlot. They were wild. Some of them were wilder than others. But there was one in there that we nicknamed Muley because he was like a mule deer. He had great big ears on, on either side. And and when I'd go out to feed him cake, I had him on some native grass that was dry, and I was giving him cake to help the nutrition. He wouldn't come in. He would stand off maybe 100, 150 yards, and you couldn't get him. And we'll finish his story though of what happened to him later. But I was working cattle, of course, with Smokey, and I'd gotten Smokey to where Camary could ride him because I'm getting ready to be gone in the military. And at the point that I left, I had figured it would be 2 years, and we'd put these steers into a certain pasture because I had good fences on the pasture, and I figured they would stay there until it was time to sell them. Well, one day, her under some advice from other people, Camary moved the steers to a new pasture, moved them to the South Bluff pasture. It did not have good fences. It bordered the Cimarron River, and the first day or two, when you put new cattle into a field, one of the first things they'll do, they'll fill up, they'll eat, and then they'll walk the whole perimeter. They'll walk the whole fence line. Well, the fence along the river was not very good fence, and they found a down spot, and they all went out into the river, and they took off down the river. And Camary got a call one morning saying, "Camary, do you have 50, or do you have a big group of black bally steers?" She said, "Yes." And she said, they told her, says, "Well, they have gone under the Ripley Bridge, which was 2 miles from us, and they're headed downriver." And so Camary, I told her that if she had any problem, take Smokey, and he would help solve the problem. So she gets on Smokey and gets on their trail, gets out in the Cimarron River, and it's 10 miles before she catches them. And she gets around them on the other side, and she and that bald-faced horse brought those 50 head of cattle back home. Now, those of you who have worked cattle, that's quite a feat to have one horse go get 50 head that has no restrictions around them and bring them back home. And she did that, but he knew what he was doing with cattle, uh, because I had worked him with driving cattle and roping cattle, and you remember the story of how uh, when he was 2.5, I roped a bull on him and just stepped off and went to the house, tied to the saddle horn, wanted him to get used to working a rope. And when I went back out 2 hours later, he's standing up, looking down a tight rope at that bull. That's what you want a horse to do, is keep a rope tight and keep their head facing the bull. But he had been not jerked off his feet. The saddle was scraped on either side. He was scraped on either side where he had been drugged. But some 20 years later, I roped a cow off of him. Didn't need a choke rope that a lot of cowboys use, a rope around the horse's neck that the lat rope goes through to keep the horse's head straight. Uh, but he stood there and looked down a rope some almost 20 years later while I doctored a cow. So they learn, and they learn well. But he was a remarkable horse to be able to go and bring that many cattle back. Uh, the next Sunday, I was calling Camary every Sunday night. She told me what had happened. And I said, just call Charles Ripley and sell them. Just run them through the sale ring and to get rid of the cattle. and they gathered all of them, but this muley, they couldn't get him in, and so he was just out in the pasture running wild all by himself, much like a deer. Uh, and he got in with some neighbors' cows, and Richard Cassius had some cows, and he got in with them and stayed with them, and Camary kept me apprised of it, and along about this time, I get sent home from the military, and so I'm home, and I call Richard, and he said, yeah, he said that black ballie is in with my cattle, and I said, Richard, if you ever get him in the barn or in the corral, shut the gates on him, and I'll come get him. And it was about 10 days later, he called me and he says, I've got him. And he says, I'd sure like you to come get him. He's tearing my place up. His corral was 2 hog bar panels high with a rail down the top and on railroad tie posts. I mean, this was a big stout corral. And he was stretching that wire, hitting it, trying to get out. And we got him. I went over and we got him driven into Richard's barn. And I backed my trailer up there. I had a 14-foot stock trailer, and the back gate swung open wide, and it had a middle gate in it. We got the back gate against one side of the alleyway of the barn, and the trailer up against the other side of the alleyway, and we ran him in there. And when he went in, I stepped in behind him and threw the middle gate so it would lock because he was running, and jumped back out and slammed the back gate. And he had gone through the front gate, put his head up. Most horse trailers have a plexiglass window in the front of them over the feed racks. He poked his head out through that, had come back, jumped the middle gate, and was running into the back gate just as I got it latched. So I hauled him home, and we had a big rock stud barn. And I thought, well, I'll just put him in there and I'll just feed him out and we'll butcher him. And so I put him in this stud barn. It had big double Dutch doors on the front of it, and it had 2 stud stalls in it that he could have both of those. And I put him in there, and I was feeding him the water, and he was losing weight. He wasn't, he was so nervous and so wild. And finally I said, okay, I'm just going to haul him to the sale barn. So I got the trailer there and opened it up and got him in the trailer, and I got to the sale barn. And when I opened it, the rear end course, he ran in and they ran him into a pen. Well, the outside perimeter of the stockyards there was a 7-foot tall fence. And he wouldn't try that, but the interior fences were 4-foot fences. And he would just jump one to the other. We ran him on the scale because we needed a weight to sell him by. And the scale just had a big gate on either end of it, and ran him in there, and we shut the front gate just as he jumped out of the back gate. And so he finally got in with a pen of 4 that he stayed with, and we got all 5 of them on the scale, and we just deducted the weight from the others so that we could get a weight on him. And they ran him through the sale, and I know that the fellow that bought him had a feedlot that didn't have big fences. I don't know anything else. I don't know where they wound up with the calf, but he went to a feedlot. They may have done well with him, and they may not have. I don't know. My guess is he got comfortable with a big herd of cows and food, and they were able to solve his problem. Anyway, that was Muley that we had. That was his name, Muley. So you have a wonderful day. Remember to subscribe and pass this on to a friend. Have a good day.